Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. The evening began with a festive mood as relatives poured into the old family house, their laughter echoing through the wide hallways that once carried the voices of childhood games and late-night talks. The air smelled of traditional food cooking in the kitchen, a blend of spices that immediately made everyone feel at home. Children ran across the living room chasing each other, their energy spilling into every corner, while the elders sat in groups, catching up after months apart. Music played softly in the background, blending perfectly with the conversations and bursts of laughter. For the narrator, standing there in the middle of it all, the house was more than walls and a roof. It was the place their parents had built with their own hands, a space filled with memories of birthdays, weddings, arguments, reconciliations, and everything in between. Every brick seemed to hold a story. This house wasn't just home. It was a legacy. The narrator quietly soaked in the scene, grateful that everyone had gathered again under one roof, just as their parents had always wished. Yet, beneath the laughter and chatter, a quiet unease lingered. It wasn't visible to most, but the narrator felt it deeply. The source of that tension was their brother, who hadn't arrived yet. Old disputes about inheritance, whispered accusations, and simmering rivalry had created a divide that was hard to ignore. Though the narrator tried to push the thoughts aside, they knew the evening would not remain peaceful for long. The door swung open with dramatic force, and in walked the brother. He carried himself with an air of arrogance, his clothes loud and flashy, as though chosen to outshine everyone else in the room. His voice immediately rose above the others, commanding attention without invitation. He shook hands with relatives, but did so with a sense of ownership, as though he were the host rather than a guest. Soon enough, his words began to carry sharper edges. With a smirk, he commented, "Some people around here live rent-free, you know," glancing directly at the narrator as though daring them to respond. A few chuckles spread among the guests, though awkwardly, as everyone sensed the jab. He didn't stop there. In a louder tone, he added, "It won't be long before this place belongs to me completely. Just wait and see." His tone was coated with smugness, each word meant to sting. The relatives exchanged uneasy looks. Some pretended not to hear, focusing instead on their food or conversations. Others shifted uncomfortably, aware of the tension rising but unwilling to step into it. The narrator felt the weight of every gaze, though no one openly spoke. Choosing calm over confrontation, the narrator forced a smile, serving food to nearby guests, and tried to keep the atmosphere light. Inside, though, emotions churned. Hurt, frustration, and anger pressed hard, but the narrator knew it wasn't the time to explode. Tonight was supposed to be about family, about togetherness, and they were determined not to let the evening fall apart so soon. Still, the brothers' words lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break, foreshadowing the conflict that everyone secretly sensed but no one dared to name. Dinner had barely settled into its rhythm when the storm broke. Plates were filled, glasses clinked, and the buzz of chatter created a warm hum across the long dining table. The narrator had almost convinced themselves that the evening might pass without incident. But then, scraping his chair back with a loud, deliberate screech, the brother stood up. All eyes turned toward him, forks paused halfway to mouths. He cleared his throat, the smirk already playing on his lips, and in a voice that carried across the room, he declared, "Now I'm the owner of this house. Get out." The words hung heavy in the air, like a stone dropped into still water. Conversation died instantly. A hush swept over the room, broken only by the clinking of a glass someone accidentally knocked over in shock. The children, sensing something had shifted, froze in place, their laughter silenced. The room that had been alive with warmth just seconds before now felt charged, tense, suffocating. The narrator's heart thudded in their chest. They looked around at the wide eyes of relatives, at the pale face of their aunt, at their mother's hand trembling against the edge of the table. If the parents were still alive, their faces showed pain, deep, sharp heartbreak at seeing their sons at odds over the very home that was supposed to unite them. If they were gone, Their absence weighed even heavier, for it felt as though their legacy was being twisted into a weapon. The brother's voice, cruel and triumphant, filled the void left by silence. He turned, his gaze locking on the narrator like a predator narrowing in on prey. His hand shot out, finger pointed directly, leaving no doubt who the command was for. "You've always been nothing but a burden," he sneered. "Living here, as if it's yours. But it isn't. The papers say my name, not yours. Legally, this house belongs to me. You don't belong here anymore." His words were daggers, cutting through the fragile peace of the gathering. Whispers rippled down the table. A few relatives shook their heads in disapproval, but kept their voices low. Others nodded faintly, unwilling to risk being on the wrong side of the brother's wrath. Fear had a way of silencing people, and he knew it. The narrator caught the glance of a cousin who quickly looked away, ashamed of their cowardice. A few loyal family members tried to offer comfort with their eyes, their quiet support hidden but real. Humiliation pressed down hard, hot and suffocating. To be called out like this, in front of everyone, stripped of dignity and respect, it was unbearable. The narrator felt a flush of heat rise to their face, shame pricking at their skin. For a moment, they wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear and escape the cruel spotlight their brother had forced upon them. But beneath the weight of humiliation, something else stirred. Anger. It rose slowly at first, burning deep in the chest, curling its way upward. Each insult, each smug twist of the brother's words only fed the fire. He thought he could shame them into silence, push them into the shadows. But instead, his cruelty was waking something far stronger. The narrator clenched their fists under the table, steadying their breath. The room was still buzzing with whispers, relatives murmuring half-hearted judgments, but the narrator's focus had narrowed. They looked at their brother, at the arrogance painted across his face, the greed shining in his eyes, and for the first time that night, they didn't feel small. They felt an almost dangerous calm, the kind that comes just before lightning splits the sky. Humiliation was still there, yes, but it was no longer alone. Something powerful was pushing back against it, something that would not allow this attack to be the final word. The brother might think he had won, but he had just sparked a battle he wasn't prepared for. The silence after the brother's outburst seemed endless, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every eye in the room lingered on the narrator, waiting for them to either crumble in humiliation or storm away in defeat. For a fleeting second, the temptation was real, to walk out, to avoid more pain, to let the arrogance win just so the night could end. But then the narrator's gaze fell on the family portraits hanging on the wall, faded photographs of their parents smiling, holding both brothers when they were young. The house was not just bricks or paperwork, it was their parents' love, their sacrifices, their dream of keeping the family together. To surrender it now would be like erasing them. The narrator straightened their shoulders and rose to their feet, the chair legs dragging softly against the floor. Calmness settled over them, not the shaky calm of fear, but the steady calm of conviction. Inside, their mind whispered firmly, "This house holds my parents' love. I won't let greed steal it." They faced their brother squarely, voice even but sharp with resolve. "You say this house belongs only to you," they began, "but what you really want is to own people, not just walls. You've spent your life chasing control, flashing power, and still, deep down, you've built nothing for yourself. Every time you've fallen into debt, every time you've failed in business, every time you've turned your back on family, someone else has had to clean up after you. And yet here you stand, pretending you've earned the right to decide who belongs in this home." The brother's face reddened instantly, his smugness cracking into fury. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the glasses. "Don't you dare lecture me in front of everyone," he shouted. "You've been living off scraps, hiding behind sentiment while I've done the real work. My name is on the papers. That's all that matters." But the narrator didn't flinch. The louder the brother grew, the steadier their tone became. It was a battle of thunder against stone, and the relatives could feel the shift. Whispers faded, replaced by attentive silence. People leaned forward, their expressions changing, no longer entertained by drama, but intrigued, almost swayed. The narrator's composure was unraveling the brother's carefully crafted image. The room grew tense as the brother kept spitting insults, his voice cracking under the strain of anger. But instead of matching rage for rage, the narrator answered with quiet truths. Our parents didn't raise us to shout people into submission. They raised us to protect each other. They wanted this house to be a home, not a trophy for your ego. Gasps rose when the narrator finally revealed what had been kept hidden. With steady hands, they pulled out a folded envelope from a drawer near the dining table. You claim this house is yours alone, they said, laying out the documents on the table, but you forget one important thing. Our parents made sure this home would never belong to one person. Their will clearly states it was to be shared equally. No one has the right to drive the other out. The brother froze, his mouth opening but no words escaping. Relatives leaned in, some standing, their curiosity now transformed into judgment. A murmur spread through the room as the narrator explained further. Yes, your name may be on certain papers, but those papers were twisted, manipulated after their death. Legally, you cannot throw anyone out, not when the will exists, not when their signatures are clear. You tried to erase the truth, but it still stands. It was as if the party had shifted into a courtroom. The dining table became the witness stand, the documents the evidence, and the relatives the jury. Some shook their heads at the brother, disappointment written across their faces. Others finally found their voices. Is this true? Did you really do that? How could you betray your parents' wishes? The brother stammered, trying to piece together excuses, but his voice lacked the confidence it once carried. He gestured wildly, calling the will fake, the signatures forged, anything to claw back authority. But his desperation only betrayed him further. The narrator, still calm, simply added, "If you doubt this, we can take it to court. But you know what the outcome will be. And so does everyone here." The room's energy had transformed completely. The brothers' dominance had withered, replaced by suspicion and judgment. The narrator, once the target of humiliation, now stood as the defender of truth and dignity. Relatives who had stayed silent earlier nodded subtly, moral support shifting in their direction. What had started as a family celebration had indeed become a tribunal of loyalty, justice, and legacy. And in that tribunal, it was clear who truly held the strength. The brother's face twisted with rage as murmurs spread across the table, judgment now turning against him. His hands shook, and in a desperate attempt to reclaim control, he slammed his palm against the wooden table so hard the dishes rattled. "Enough," he roared, his voice cracking like a whip across the silence. "You think you can embarrass me? You think you can turn them against me with your lies?" His words dripped venom, his chest heaving as he glared around the room, daring anyone to contradict him. A few relatives shrank back in their seats, startled by the sudden violence. A glass toppled, spilling wine onto the tablecloth like blood seeping into fabric. The brother leaned forward, fists clenched, his voice dropping into a dangerous growl. "I built my life without anyone's help. You all know I'm the one with the power here. If I say this house is mine, then it is. And if anyone stands in my way..." He didn't finish, but the threat hung thick in the air. The narrator rose slowly, the calmness of their movements a stark contrast to the storm raging across from them. Their voice was firm, unshaken. "Threats don't change the truth," they said, their gaze steady. "You can scream, you can slam tables, you can try to frighten people into silence, but fear doesn't make you right. All it does is expose the emptiness behind your words." The brother's jaw tightened. "Don't talk to me like I'm a child," he spat. But the narrator pressed on, their tone laced with both sorrow and strength. "Our parents gave us this home, so we would have a place to protect each other, not destroy each other. Do you remember what Father said the last time we sat together in this dining room? He said, 'No matter what happens, don't let greed divide you. Promise me.'" Their voice caught for just a moment, heavy with emotion, before it steadied again. That was their last wish. And here you are, tearing that promise apart. The words struck harder than any raised fist. Some relatives lowered their heads, tears forming in their eyes as the memories resurfaced. The weight of the parents' absence pressed down on the room, the reminder of their values silencing even the harshest whispers. For the first time, the brother's fury faltered. His lips parted, but no sound came. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of his breathing growing ragged. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he snatched a glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, shards scattering across the floor. A child screamed, and several relatives gasped, pushing back their chairs in alarm. The brother's chest rose and fell like a man drowning in his own rage. "You'll regret this," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the narrator. "You've turned them all against me. Do you think this is over? It's not over." And with that, he stormed out, his footsteps pounding down the hall until the front door slammed shut behind him. The echo of it lingered in the air like a final clap of thunder after a storm. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the tension broke. Relatives exchanged looks, relief mingling with disbelief. The narrator remained standing, their composure unshaken despite the chaos that had just erupted. Their calm presence now felt like the anchor holding the entire family together. A small hand tugged at their sleeve. The narrator looked down to see one of the children, eyes wide, face still pale from fear, clinging tightly to their arm. Soon another child joined, wrapping tiny arms around their waist. One by one, more of the younger cousins gravitated toward them, instinctively seeking comfort and safety. It was a silent declaration of who they trusted, of who they believed carried the true spirit of the family. Around the table, quiet nods of respect passed from relative to relative. No one clapped aloud. It wasn't that kind of moment, but the approval was there, heavy and undeniable. In their eyes, the narrator had won not just the argument, but the moral victory. They had faced humiliation, cruelty, and intimidation, and had stood their ground without losing dignity. The broken glass glimmered faintly under the chandelier light, a reminder of the chaos that had tried, and failed, to shatter the family. And as the narrator gently comforted the children, they realized something powerful. The house was still whole, not because of walls or papers, but because the spirit of unity had endured. The party never truly returned to celebration after the brothers stormed out. Though food still sat on the table and music played faintly in the background, the night had shifted into something else entirely. Guests gathered in hushed circles, speaking in low voices. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others sighed heavily, muttering that they had seen this coming for years. Word spread quickly. The brother tried to steal the house, but was stopped. It became the single sentence repeated again and again, like the summary of a lesson no one would forget. Several relatives, who had sat silent during the confrontation, approached the narrator quietly. Their words were soft, almost guilty. "You were brave to stand up to him," one uncle admitted, avoiding direct eye contact. An aunt dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering, "I should have spoken sooner. Forgive me for my silence." Even those who had once leaned toward the brother now found themselves offering hesitant nods of respect. The narrator accepted their words without bitterness, recognizing that fear often kept people still when courage was required. Tonight had revealed not only the brothers' greed, but also the quiet truths of family loyalty. The children, still clinging to the narrator, eventually dozed off in the safety of familiar arms. Their presence felt like an unspoken reminder of what was truly at stake, not just ownership of walls and land, but the spirit of a family home where the next generation could feel safe, loved, and united. Looking around the house, at the worn photographs, the scuffed floors, the echoes of laughter still lingering in the corners, the narrator felt the weight of the evening settle into clarity. It had never been about the property itself. Bricks could be rebuilt, papers could be rewritten, but what mattered was something far deeper: respect, dignity, and the invisible thread of family bonds that greed had tried to sever. The brother had come seeking power, hoping to humiliate and dominate, but what he had truly revealed was the emptiness of his own heart. In contrast, The narrator's strength had not been in shouting louder, but in holding firm to values that could not be bought or stolen. As the night drew to a close and the last relatives prepared to leave, the narrator lingered in the quiet of the living room. The house seemed to breathe with them, alive with memories. They thought of their parents, of the countless nights they had spent in this very space, teaching lessons of kindness, fairness, and love. For a moment, it felt as though those voices were still here, whispering reassurance that their legacy was safe. A gentle calm washed over the narrator. They understood now that fighting back had not been an act of revenge, but of protection, protecting not only the home, but the honor and dignity that came with it. Their parents' promise of unity might have been tested, but it had not been broken. As the narrator finally turned off the lights, preparing to rest after the longest night of their life, a final thought lingered, steady and unshakable. That night, I didn't just defend a house. I defended my family's honor. For more videos, please subscribe our channel Awesome Visual Story.